Okay, so satellite overview. So it's probably one of the most important satellite techniques for physical oceanography, and it's a unique capability for ocean forecasting. And actually, discussion we had yesterday on what was the motivation for developing oceanography in a lot of countries, and France in particular in Europe. Satellite altimetry was actually a driver for the development of operational oceanography. It's because we have the capability to measure in real time the ocean with altimetry that we could develop data simulations system on ocean forecasting. And this is very much related to the fact that we are measuring sea level from altimetry, and sea levels is a variable that reflects the ocean interior. So we had a discussion this morning on can you measure the interior of the ocean, profiling the ocean with a satellite remote sensing? So it's not possible, but when you have sea level measurement, we see later that sea level reflects the ocean interior. So it's a strong constraint for four-dimensional ocean circulation estimation. So it's also a very mature technique, more than 25 years. So this is a list of different missions that have been flying over the past 25 years. And we have several missions which are flying at this time. So JSON-2, JSON-3, CLARISAT-2, HY-2A, Sentinel-3A. It's also one of the most challenging in terms of accuracy. As I explained this morning, we need to measure with a precision of about 1 centimeter from a satellite flying about 1,000 kilometers. And there have been major advances in sensor, data processing, algorithm performance over the past 20 years, which makes these techniques extremely useful for oceanography. And this has been a tremendous work by engineers and scientists are working together to improve the accuracy. And we have been moving on accuracy, 25 years ago, of several meters to only a few centimeters today. So the different missions, again, in the discussion, what we have for satellite altimetry, so we need a reference mission, so very precise mission that is required for climate signal analysis, and to serve also as a reference for the other. And this is done with very optimized missions. So this is the top exposure on JSON series, JSON-1, JSON-2, JSON-3, and the follow-up will be the Sentinel-6 or JSON-CS. And this provides us a reference on a law to address the climatic scale on a mid-sea level rise and so on. And we need complementary mission to address the sampling issues. This is done with missions such in the past ERS-1, 2, and LISAT, and now with Sentinel, SARAL, Altica, and CLARISAT. Okay, so an altimeter mission is not only a radar altimeter. This is a radar altimeter, of course. First, this is the main instrument, but usually it's a Ku band, so at 30 gigahertz. So it's also, and we'll have this will be discussed by Rosemary as well. Other altimeter and Ka band. We are also using other bands, but mainly for ionospheric correction. We need a B-frequency system to correct for the propagation in the ionosphere. This is the reason why we are using another band. You need in addition a microwave radiometer for atmospheric correction. And last but not least, you need a very precise tracking system, because you need to know very precisely the position of the satellite with respect to the ellipsoid. And this means that you need to use different systems of GPS, DORIS, and laser tracking. And you have here two examples of two missions when you have this radar altimeter, which is here, and all these different instruments that you have. This was LISAT, which was very large, and JSON, which is much smaller, because this is a satellite dedicated to altimetry. So the satellite altimetry coverage, so we are using for ocean mission exact repeat orbits. That is, we request that the satellite is always flying on the same track with a repeat period, which is 10 days for TOPEC, JSON-1, JSON-2, JSON-3, which was 35 days for ERS and LISAT and for SARAL Altica when we are dealing with the ocean mission. So this is global homogeneous. This is nadir, so you just measure along the track, and you don't measure over the swath that the swath satellite will allow, but the conventional altimetry is a measure along track. Typically what is done is that we get a measure once every second, so about every 7 kilometers along the track. And this is what we use for to derive sea level estimation. Okay, you are just here, the typical sampling that you get with the JSON. This is the tracks, so you will get measurement along those tracks every 10 days. in a case of, well, difficult to see, okay, but the track spacing is much smaller, but 80 kilometers at the equator. This is for ERS, Ambisat, or Altica, and in that case, but the repeat time is only 35 days. So you need to combine these different sampling to get the good coverage. So principle very simple, is simple. So you send a pulse and a radar emits a signal, and it propagates through the atmosphere and just measures the distance between the satellite and the surface. And from this distance, from the time, sorry, you get the distance. And the big challenge is to get the centimeter precision, which is, and this is from this distance you get the sea surface 8. I discussed this morning this issue of being limited on the footprint of radiometer. I mean, in the case of altimetry, we don't have a beam limited system. It's a very more specific, what we call pulse limited altimeters, just because this actually is much better to have a finer footprint. So you just use a very short pulse, I mean a few nanoseconds, and then you illuminate different areas over the ocean, and then you get the signal, the return signal. We'll explain you. So it's a bit different from the discussion I had this morning on the general footprint of microwave radiometer, for instance. So this is just how it works. I mean, if you have here an example in case of a very flat sea, so no waves. So you have this signal, the short pulse, which is sent from the satellite. So this is the signal received at the level of the satellite. So you start, I mean, no signal received. As soon as you hit the surface, you have this area which is illuminated by the radar, and this is the signal you get back. And then as time goes on, this is the illuminated area, and this is, you see here, the signal received by the satellite on board, and you see here, and so on. In case of, if you have waves, of course you will start to see the signal which is first received by the crest of the wave, so you will get a signal like this, and you have a progressive increase of the return signal due to wave here. So in practice, this shows that you get also information on the wave height. And actually, what you do on this part of the basic processing of satellite altimetry, the waveform you receive as this shape, and from this the time to reach the mid-power gives you the distance, and the slope here is proportional to significant wave height. So you get an information of significant wave height. You get also an information of the total the backscatter, I mean, received, which is proportional to the wind speed. So the main parameters, but I will mainly discuss here sea surface 8, are sea level, sea surface 8, significant wave height, wind speed. And you can also address ice, land, lakes characteristic, but I will not discuss this today. So if you look then into the detail, of course it's not that as simple. So what you get the distance between the satellite on the sea surface. You need to get very precisely the position of the satellite, which is orbit here, which is on the end you get the sea surface 8, which is orbit minus the range, the distance, give you this sea surface 8. So sorry, the SUP. Yes, so the distance between the sea level on a given reference ellipsoid, or the this is the basic estimation, and you need, of course, to correct for many errors, be them noise, instrumental error, and various geophysical what we call error, which are actually signal, but you want to correct if you want to get the dynamic topography. So, I mean, the altimeter measurements, they are affected by a large number of errors. So we have the propagation effect in the troposphere, in the ionosphere. We have the electromagnetic bias, which is a fact due to the fact that the wave do not reflect the same signal if you are on a crest on the trough of wave. You also have to correct for tidal signal. So those are actual signal, but you want to get rid of those signal if you want to express sea level and dynamic topography. On inverse barometer effect, which which is a response of the ocean to pressure. So for some of these errors, you correct them with dedicated instrumentation. So we have a dual frequency altimeter for ionospheric correction or radiometer for wet tropospheric correction. So, assuming you can correct all this error, you have this very simple equation at the end that you have the sea surface 8 measured by the altimeter is the sum of the geoid plus eta, the dynamic topography. And the dynamic topography is a signal of interest for oceanography because the sea level relative to the geoid, which is directly related to the ocean circulation. So the first question is the geoid. So how do we do with the geoid? So the geoid is the representative of the Earth's gravity field. It's an equipotential of the Earth's gravity field. It reflects the fact that the Earth is not as large bumps and troughs, which are due to variation of the ocean bottom topography, but also inhomogeneous density of the Earth's interior. As a result, I mean, the shape of the Earth is not totally a sphere, and it has variation between minus 100 meters and 60 meters. So it's much larger than the variation you want to get for the dynamic topography, which is typically of the level of minus plus 1 meter. So initially, at the start of altimetry, geoid were not very poorly known, so you could actually never get the absolute dynamic topography with altimetry. So this is the reason why we had this repeat track analysis. So repeat track, so you're just flying always over the same track. You don't get the absolute signal, but you get, if you remove the mean, you will remove the geoid and the mean circulation and get the sea level anomaly. And there have been major progress over the recent years, in particular thanks to those two satellites. I mean, GRACE from the US and GOES from Europe, ESA. And we now have a knowledge of the geoid which is much better. I mean, I will show you later, typically a level of few centimeters for scale larger than 100 kilometers. But in any case, since geoid is near stationary for most of the oceanographic timescale we are dealing with, if you differentiate along the repeat track, you can get rid of the geoid and you get the anomaly of the sea level. Other sea level signal that you need to address. So this one is the signal that we want. We want to measure the dynamic sea surface 8, which is directly related to the ocean current. But to get that, you have other signals that usually you need to remove to analyze the ocean circulation and even in a data assimilation system. First, you have the tides. So you have to remove the ocean tides, which can be very large depending on areas. And there are also Earth tide. I mean, that's the fact that the Earth is also moving on the crust due to tidal effects. And this is done through models, some models that were developed in part and improved through the use of satellite altimetry, which are now very accurate, a few centimeters. But you have to know that there are still residual errors that remain, and they are alias to certain frequencies. So for JSON, for instance, we know that if we have an error on the M2 tide, which is the dominant tide, you will have a pseudo frequency of 60 days. Atmospheric pressure loading, this is the inverse barometer effect, the fact that when you have a pressure, your ocean will adjust difference between a region. This is so this needs to be corrected if you want to address other signal, and also the fact that and we are now using model for this, and this is a high frequency barotropic motion. This is just one example here of a model that is used today for correcting the altimetry for pressure effect, atmospheric pressure effect, but also for high-frequency barotropic signals that you usually want to remove if you want to remove the high-frequency effect. And this gives you the amplitude can be actually several tenths of centimeters. So it's actually a very large signal, but it's rather well understood. Tidal correction, as I mentioned, so ocean tides, but also the solid Earth tide. I mean, can amplitude up to 50 centimeters. That's the fact that the crust is also moving. And also other indirect effects, the loading effect, as you move water through the, due to tides, you have also loading effects that you need to correct. There is also the Earth's rotation axis that can deviate due to this. And again, this is what we call the polar tide, which is corrected. So there's a lot of full area of science on tides and tidal correction that was very significantly improved, developed through altimetry, which now allow us to analyze the remaining signal. So this is just the history of different correction of tide. I mean, starting for we really had poor model as the first, and we are now moving with really a global solution, very precise, with refinement also for the coastal areas. And the new, I mean,
the new generation, I mean, the new activities today is really to also to address internal tides, which I will not discuss here, but also a signal that you, Rosemary will certainly address this in her talk. This is just the evolution of the error budget for altimeter mission over the past 25 years. And you see this dramatic improvement from what we had in the past to know what we have today with JSON and VSAT and all these missions. We typically have the level of total error for the sea level signal at below 4 centimeters. Will not detail all, but this is the assessment which was done at the end of the verification phase of JSON 2. So you address when you launch a satellite, you have verification phase, and you check all the check that your satellite is working according to requirements. And this is just if you look at the let's say the GDR, which is a delay-mode products. What you have today with a satellite like JSON 2. You have an accuracy of C-surface 8 of about 2.5 centimeter only, with the orbit which is known to about 1 centimeter. One aspect which is very important that you need to know when we are using the data in real time, if you look at the real-time data that we get, even with this very precise JSON series, you see that the orbit is much less precise in real time. You get up to 10 centimeter. Of course, you can decrease if you wait a little. You have kind of already very good, but this is different in accuracy. You will get depending on time. And this is the state of the art of the different corrections that I will not detail here, but the different corrections that are applied to an altimeter mission like JSON 2. I mean, we're going to the sea state byte, the different tidal correction, wet tropo, dry troposphere, and so on. You don't need to worry on this, but just to be aware that when you get product from altimeter data center, there are a lot of corrections that are applied, and that could be limitation due to that. A short note on altimeter noise, but this will be discussed further by Rosemary. So the altimeter noise, so is a noise, it's a white noise usually, but it's good to know that. Important to know that this noise depends on a significant wave height, so you will not get the same noise depending on season or where you are. And you have just here illustration how the noise for JSON 2 evolves according to seasons. So this is important to take this into account in a data assimilation system. In addition, and this has been a mystery for quite a long time, I mean, between in the altimeter community, but was solved only recently. I mean, there are some correlated noise in the conventional altimetry due to the fact that we have a response to inhomogeneity in the backscatter, and this explains why you have. If you look at the spectrum of the sea level from altimetry, you see it's not a flat. Like this. This is what you get with the SAR altimetry that will be discussed by Rosemary later on. But conventionally, you have this. So there is correlated noise, and this explains that if you go to high rate, you have a much lower noise, but it doesn't translate the noise at 20 Hz, for instance, it doesn't lead to 1 Hz noise divided by 20 that we would expect if you had uncorrelated noise. So this is something to be done. Okay, on the processing, so what we do for the processing, so usually we try to correct for orbit error. Again, it depends on the mission. I mean, if the mission is very precise, you just need to do a small adjustment. Otherwise, you need to do something which is much more important. Usually what is done is to do techniques such as crossover minimization, where we use the most precise mission as a reference for the other. This is something we developed and which is still used, I mean, in the Salto DUAX system, where you use the fact that you have very precise mission, TOPEC, JSON, and so on, and you use it as a reference on doing some crossover minimization when a TOPEC or JSON track crosses an ERS or on VSAT tracks, you estimate the orbit error and you can adjust. This is a very simple, at the end, a very efficient system to intercalibrate and correct and reduce biases for the different missions. So ocean signal extraction from altimetry. So as I explained, the sea level measure, sea surface topography measured by altimetry is a sum, can be described as the sum of the geoid, the dynamic topography, and error. on what is done in a repeat track analysis. If the satellite is flying on the same repeat track, you just remove the mean, and you will remove both the geoid, the mean dynamic topography, and you get the sea level anomaly. So this is what has been done since the start of altimetry. Today, and then what is done afterwards is to add a mean dynamic topography, which can be derived from a geoid and so on. But it's important to know, I mentioned that we know much better the geoid today, but not sufficiently to allow just to correct directly the geoid here. It's because the geoid is known very precisely up to a certain scale, up to 100 kilometers. So you need to do this repeat track analysis and then add a geoid model, a mean dynamic topography deduced from a geoid on a Missy surface. One aspect, again, to be known, and this can be important in a data assimilation system. So we are using repeat track analysis for most ocean missions. So a criteria very important when you select an ocean mission, we want a repeat track. So we want the tracks to be repeated within 1 kilometer maximum. When you are starting with a new mission, and there are not, you want to build this mean track, you need a couple of years. So when you are starting a new mission, a new track, you are obliged to not to use a repeat track analysis, but use an external Missy surface to derive the sea level anomaly. It's also the case when you are for altimeter which are not flying on a repeat track. I mean, we have the example of Cryosat and also NoAltica, then when they move to a new orbit or very recently JSON 2. And this is just an illustration, and this is actually what we do in our simulation system, but this is just an example to show the sensitivity of the Missy surface. Here was an example of that due to the use of different Missy surface model. I mean, it was for Altica and Cryosat with the whole MSS Missy surface model, which was elaborated by CLS in 2011, and the most recent one. And you see that you had a spurious signal that come here because the geoid was not known sufficiently here, and you could really misinterpret this as an eddy. So this is something to be known when you are not in a repeat track. Even if we are able to build very precise Missy surface today, there is still potential errors due to this. Okay, so just to summary, as a summary, I mean, we have the sea surface 8 measured by altimetry, it's a geoid, dynamic topography, and noise. And noise here is not only instrumental noise, but a lot of real, actual ocean signals that you want to remove to estimate the dynamic topography. So what is often done for the many applications, in addition to using data in data assimilation system, is to map the altimeter data. So it's really using, which I will not detail, but it's optimal analysis, which is very similar to what you do in data assimilation. Of course, much simpler. Here you have no model. You just have you map directly the data. So it's space-time optimal interpolation, which are you take the observation you get along the track, and then you map on a gridded field, taking into account the covariance model, so the correlation between the different observation on the noise. One aspect which is was developed and which is working actually very well is in those techniques you can elaborate a little more on the way you do the mapping by taking into account the fact that you still have noise along the track, which are remaining inverse barometer correction, remaining tidal error, and so on, which makes that in some cases, I mean, you have a long track biases like this. And the technique was modified some time ago to introduce in the covariance matrix of the objective analysis a correlated error, and this really had a dramatic effect in the way you can map sea level on ocean current. It's still very difficult to apply this technique directly in a data simulation system, because this is something that would be needed, because this needs to use a covariance matrix for error covariance matrix, which are non-diagonal, which can be a bit challenging given the size of the assimilation technique. Sorry. So then the data, I mean, the data merge and so on. So one aspect I mentioned that the real-time, so real-time data are less accurate than the delay modes. So this is something to be aware. I mean, if you have really always a trade-off when for the data you need to process, and so there is always a very specific issue for the real-time processing. And if you compare what you can achieve in real time versus delay mode, this is just one illustration. If you compare with 4 satellites, what we would be able to get in real time compared to what we could obtain in delay mode after reprocessing, and you have very large differences. And this is due to the fact first that when you are in real time, you have less data available, but also that the error on the correction are less accurate. Okay, mean dynamic topography, a few the status today. So I mentioned this, that the fact that thanks to GRACE and GAUSS, we are now able to compute very precise much more precise mean dynamic topography, which are obtained as a difference between a mean sea surface. Mean sea surface is something which is obtained as a mean with all available altimeter data, and we remove the geoid model. So, and this is exactly here. So what you do, you extract the sea level anomaly from altimeter, so which shows this repeat track analysis. You estimate this mean dynamic topography from mean sea surface minus a geoid model, which are typically, you don't need to resolve the very fine scale here. Up to 100 kilometers is often sufficient, at least for if you are not in the coastal areas. And then you add the two, and you obtain the absolute dynamic topography, which actually is the signal you would need to be ingested in a model. This is just show you what is an MSS and what is a geoid. And if you look at the two, MSS are very similar. But the difference between the two is the signal you want as an oceanographer to get, which is the dynamic topography. Yeah, just okay. This is showing the different the way it is processed. It was processing which was done before GRACE and GAUSS. I mean, so an estimation with previous geoid models, the error associated, some filtering to get mean dynamic topography, and this was dramatically improved with the GAUSS mission. And this is just an example of the mean geostrophic current, mean geostrophic current you get with GAUSS, and typically an accuracy which is now assessed at the level about 1 to 2 centimeters for 100 kilometer resolution for the mean dynamic topography. In addition, and this is a work which is done in particular by Marie-Hélène Riot and colleagues, and it's really not only working with GAUSS and GRACE, but also adding other in-situ measurements and so on to get even more precise mean dynamic topography. I will not detail this very much, but just to highlight that this is actually an area where there is a lot of potential improvement in the data assimilation system. If you use a precise mean dynamic topography, this will have a major impact in your data assimilation system. This is a difference between two mean dynamic topography, typically between -3 and 3 centimeters, and just a study which was made by Mathieu Hamon in our group at Mercator Ocean, and shows the impact if you do the assimilation of this different mean dynamic topography, and you look at the impact on this is the integral of the difference between 0 and 2000 meters for temperature, and you can have very significant biases in temperature, because you are using because of the error of the mean dynamic topography. So this is something that has still a lot of potential to be improved. Okay, to go through this altimetry on oceanography. So why is it very important for oceanography? So we are measuring the sea level of the geoid, and simply which is if you look at the Navier-Stokes equation, very simplified. So you have this very simple relationship of geostrophy, which relates the velocity to the pressure gradient, the hydrostatic balance. And if you just translate this, given that the pressure is proportional to the sea surface topography relative to the geoid, you have this very simple relationship, which is show you that if you get the sea level, you get this geostrophic ocean circulation. So very similar to what we have, this atmospheric pressure on wind. And so as a result, you take a current like this in the Gulf Stream, so you have the dynamic topography here. So it's about between minus 50, 150 centimeters, and you have the current which is flowing around this this contour of dynamic topography. If then you look at the more on what happens on a vertical. I mean, first, if you play with this equation, and if you assume that the density is a constant or it depends only on Z, you will have this very simple relationship that the vertical velocity, the shear of the velocity is equal to 0, which means that you have motions that are barotropic that do not depend on density field. More generally, if you take this same equation and you work on these different equations, so it's actually very simple, and you integrate this equation from the bottom, from the reference level to the surface, and if then you compare with what you can you measure with altimetry, you reach this very simple equation that the sea level which is measured by altimetry is a sum of what we call a steric height. Steric height is the integral of the density anomaly from the bottom to the surface plus a bottom pressure term. And this is why altimetry on sea level is so powerful for constraining data assimilation model, because you have this steric height which is really representative of the full water column, and this is really crucial for constraining ocean model. Some very simple numerical application on geostrophy. I mean, it just if you play with this very simple term, if you have a slope of 1 meter over 100 kilometers, it will give you a current of 1 meter per second at mid-latitude. But if you look at low latitude, so at only a slope of only 10 centimeters over 100 kilometers will give you the same current. This is to be well understood. On the effect of temperature gradient and dynamic topography on the steric, if you assume that is only the main signal you see, you can make a simple calculation. Assume you have a gradient of 10 degrees, that's typically what you get across a Gulf Stream ring over 100-200 kilometers. So you will see that will give a signature of about 1.5 meter in the dynamic topography, here using an estimation of the thermal expansion coefficient to translate the temperature variation in density. Okay, a few, very briefly, I mean, what have been done with the main signals that can be observed with altimetry. So lot of really a breakthrough and revolution with altimetry with the Topex Poseidon and later on the JSON series, because it was the first time we had precise enough altimeter to measure the large-scale sea level variations, because the satellite was really optimized for such objective, and also to measure the mean sea level variation with a very precise, with less than 1 millimeter per year accuracy. And you have this important achievement on the monitoring of the El Nino La Nina event with Topex and JSON, the monitoring of the mean sea level rise, of course, which is an critical parameter to be monitored with a lot of societal impact, but not only globally. I mean, you have the curve being about 3.3 millimeter per year, but also regionally. And you see a lot of variation, I mean, depending on region, on this mean sea level rise. So a lot of work has been done on understanding those signals, and in particular through the merging with the GRACE observation and also with Argo. A lot of work on achievement done also on the merging of altimeter products, which really allow to get a new view of the ocean. So mesoscale variabilities that you can get if you merge altimeter data from several missions. So you get really this smaller scale of this of the circulation. On a lot has been known and understood thanks to these altimeter data sets, which are then crucial to constrain models. I will just skip this one, but just to explain that when you are using maps of altimetry, I mean, typically their maps are derived with 2 or 3 or 4 altimeters. Those maps, I mean, they cannot resolve. You have to be careful when you use those maps, because this is a very simple product to use. But of course, you cannot resolve those signals. And it's just a comparison of a long track spectrum with the spectrum you get from maps. And you see that really maps that you can get through Aviso and through the Copernicus today, they really resolve wavelengths above 250 kilometers only. So that's something to be done. So this has many results that have been obtained thanks to the use of multiple altimeters to characterize mesoscale variabilities, the fronts, model validation, and so on. Just something which is very important in the perspective of operational oceanography is the way, since the data are then used to constrain model, they have also been very useful to assess how models are improved with different evolution of resolution and also parametrization of the models. This is just one example here to compare different model resolution, eddy kinetic energy from models and from observation. AD tracking, that's something in particular the work done by Dudley Shelton and collaborators. This is done again with the maps, with some limitation, but you can really have a new view of the ocean, of the turbulent ocean, and you can track ADs. You can really understand very much how they behave, how they propagate, and how they evolve. I will go briefly through expert on the way the processing which is done today, in an operational system. This is done as part of Aviso and the sea-level thematic assembly centers of Copernicus Marine Service. And typically, different steps, today they follow what I presented initially. So you start with a lot of different altimeter products that come from different agencies. So there are important step to make sure that you can homogenize the different data sets. Some work to do the cross calibration and then the merging. And the cross calibration is what I explained initially. So you need first to correct for orbit error. This is done through this crossover analysis. And there are also empirical reduction of long wavelength error, which is done through optimal interpolation. So different steps which are very important if you want to use the data. It's typically what you get. If you don't do this, you take directly the product from a satellite agency without any cross calibration, you will get sea-level anomaly map like this one, and this is when you can correct this through this calibration. All this processing is done in real time. And what you get at the end is what we call the level 3, which are along track, still along track, but re-interpolated along the track. This is why we call them level 3, but which are intercalibrated and homogeneous between the different satellite missions. And this is really the data you can then assimilate in model. Yes, and just to be reminded that we have so different class of products, so real-time, delay time products, and reprocessed products. This is done from DUAX, but for different centers, more or less the same. And so you have products, and typically those products have to be used if you do a long-term reanalysis, or if you do a reprocessing this one. Real-time, you have to use this one, but taking into account that the error is larger. This is just one example here from the Salto DUAX, the along track level 3 data, and then what you get if you do a map, through optimal interpolation. Something to be known as well, and I will not detail, but it's important to be known that in different centers, the case what we do for Copernicus Marine is we have global product, we also have regional product, which are with dedicated specific processing. One aspect we have been working, and this is, I think it will be addressed in other presentation, is the need to develop tailored altimeter product for data assimilation. In particular, at regional scale, when you have models that resolve tides, and of course high frequency effect, you have to be careful in the way you assimilate altimeter observation, if you want to remove or not the tide and so on. So there's a lot of work ongoing on the best way to work on this. And for this assimilation, so this is what most people are doing today. They are using this level 3, which are still along track data, to do the assimilation. This assimilation of level 4 products, which was done in the past, I think it's no more used. It's not recommended because really the assimilation is a better mapping technique, and because you have the model forecast that provides more information. On the level 2 would be possible, but all this work which is needed to intercalibrate and homogenize the different missions, which is very heavy, it's quite complex to do it at the level of the data assimilation system. And then you use the sea-level anomaly, but preferably on an absolute dynamic topography using a mean dynamic topography. An alternative is you use the mean of your model to add to the sea-level anomaly to constrain the model. Okay, just to conclude, one aspect on the requirement for satellite altimetry. So, as you know, so the different what is done today in data assimilation. So, most groups are running global model of at least 112, regional of 136. When you go to the coastal, it's often 1 kilometer or smaller. So, they really pose very strong constraint and requirement from the altimeter constellation. So, in addition, when you are dealing with applications, this is just one example here on this deep horizon oil spill, and when you need to really have a precise estimation of the currents, to analyze how the pollution will evolve over time, you need to constrain your model with a lot of altimeter data. This is the reason why we have this requirement of having at least 4 altimeters. This is what we have today. But on the longer run, so this was what I presented actually this morning, the minimum requirement, high precision altimeter system for climate application, complementary mesoscale mission, with payload at orbit optimized for ocean application, which means repeat track analysis, radiometer correction, and so on to correct for to have the best ocean signal. But we have the evolution of technology that will be discussed by Rosemary later on, which really could improve the situation. On the longer run, we know that we need to much better address, to have a much denser space and time sampling to better address scientific and operational application. And this is where the future will most likely be a constellation of nadir altimeter with those techniques that will be presented by Rosemary. And this is where the situation where we are today with different mission over time where we are, which situation is rather good, but we know that this mission JSON2 was restarted today I think, but it's no more on a repeat orbit. And we have, I mean, the future is okay with this new mission, but then we have to address this high resolution challenge on the longer run. Okay, summary on issues to conclude. So satellite altimetry has a major impact on development of operational oceanography. It has been actually a driver for the development of operational oceanography. Major progress in the development of real-time high-quality altimeter products. Better assimilation system, which means that you have better use of altimeter missions. I showed this morning this impact on the data assimilation system. And we have the need to move to higher resolution. Yes, this is really the new source technique, which are very important. And they will most likely play a very important role in the future. So this ends my presentation. I just want to point out this book that will be, I mean, will be published in a couple of weeks, or maybe it's already available if you want to order. It's very a comprehensive overview of altimetry of its application. It has 18 chapters. I mean, almost 600 printed pages. It's really a reference textbook for altimetry, so you can really. It's very interesting. If you are interested in altimetry, this is a very up-to-date information of the altimeter techniques. And since I forgot to mention for my lecture this morning, also useful book if you are more interested in ocean remote sensing. These 3 books which are quite interesting. So the one by Ian Robinson, very well known on the measuring the ocean from space, from Martin, which is also very good one. And this one, which is has been available since 4 or 5 days only. So it's very comprehensive description of the different techniques, and not only for ocean application, but also for land, cryosphere, and so on. So it's a very good reference book. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Okay. Just you mentioned right now we have real-time and delay-time mode data. So I want to know whether do you have some plan to manage the distance between the delay time and the real time, such as we idealize maybe we can just in future we can just provide the real-time data. We don't need to provide the delay time data. Or do you? I don't know. Is it possible to do this by improve some technology or some analysis methods?
Okay, I mean there are trade-offs. I mean to be analyzed. I mean either you wait. For instance, if you take the products that I mentioned for JSON, we have this OGDR, which is a product which is available within 3 hours. It was designed more for meteorological application, for significant wave height and on wind. But it is also very useful for some ocean application. But if you wait only 2 days, you will get a much better product. So actually, it really depends on what you need. What is done today, I think in most, I mean, the DUAX, but also in the different systems, they are using both. I mean, you use as soon as the new data set is available, even within 2 days, it replaces the previous one. So we are using both this real-time delay mode and so on. But then you have to be, just to be explain afterwards that you need to take this into account in your data assimilation system. And of course, this is not always that, sorry, it could be a bit when we ingest, for instance, in the Salto-Dulac system, the real-time data sets, so we start, let's say, with an orbiter of 10 centimeters, which is very large. But this is corrected through the system because we do the adjustment, the crossover adjustment, and so on. So this is but still the data are slightly less accurate, and you need to take this into account.